You won't believe what happened when our HOA president thought she could intimidate us by calling the police on a completely made-up violation. But what she didn't know was that my wife had just gotten home from her shift, still in her uniform. The moment those officers saw who answered the door, everything changed. This story will shock you in the ending. Let's just say karma works in mysterious ways. It all started 3 months ago when my wife Jessica and I moved into Willowbrook Estates, a supposedly prestigious neighborhood in suburban Dallas. The houses were beautiful. The lawns were perfectly manicured and everything seemed picture perfect. What we didn't realize was that behind all that perfection lurked one of the most power-hungry HOA presidents I've ever encountered. Her name was Margaret Hendricks, a woman in her early 60s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a permanent scowl that seemed etched into her face. Margaret had been the HOA president for 8 years, and she ran the neighborhood like her own personal kingdom. Every blade of grass had to be the exact right height. Every mailbox had to be the approved shade of black. And God forbid you left your trash can out 5 minutes past pickup time. Jessica works as a police officer for the Dallas Police Department. She's been on the force for 12 years and has earned the respect of her colleagues through hard work and dedication. When we moved to Willowbrook, she was excited about the idea of living in a quiet, safe neighborhood where she could relax after long shifts dealing with the city's problems. The first sign of trouble came during our second week in the house. Jessica had just finished a grueling night shift and came home around 7 in the morning, exhausted. She parked her personal car in our driveway, grabbed her gear bag, and headed inside to shower and sleep. What she didn't notice was Margaret Hendricks watching from her window across the street, already plotting her first move against the new neighbors. That afternoon, we found our first HOA violation notice tucked under our windshield wiper. The offense? Parking a non-compliant vehicle in our driveway overnight. I read the notice 3 times, completely confused. Our car was a standard Honda Civic, nothing unusual about it. When I called the HOA office for clarification, Margaret's assistant explained that vehicles with excessive wear or unprofessional appearance weren't allowed to be visible from the street between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. I looked at our car again. Sure, it had a few minor dings and scratches, but it was clean and well-maintained. This was clearly Margaret flexing her authority on the new residents. Jessica was too tired to deal with it that day, so I decided to handle it myself. I drafted a polite email explaining that our vehicle was in perfectly acceptable condition and requesting specific documentation about what constituted excessive wear. Margaret's response came within an hour, and it was anything but professional. She wrote that the HOA board had zero tolerance for residents who think they're above community standards, and that we had 7 days to remedy the situation or face escalating fines. The tone was condescending and aggressive, clearly designed to intimidate us into compliance. That's when Jessica decided to get involved. After reading Margaret's email, her jaw tightened in that way I'd learned meant she was switching into her professional mode. "This woman has no idea who she's messing with," she said quietly. But instead of escalating immediately, Jessica suggested we play this smart. We would document everything and respond through proper channels. Over the next few weeks, the violations kept coming. Our grass was slightly too long during a week when our lawnmower was being repaired. Our holiday decorations were not in compliance with seasonal guidelines because we used white lights instead of the approved warm white. Our newspaper was creating visual clutter because the delivery person sometimes threw it near our walkway instead of directly on the porch. Each violation came with increasingly aggressive language from Margaret. She began including phrases like final warning and legal action in her notices, even for the most minor infractions. It was clear she was building a paper trail, probably hoping to fine us into submission or force us to move. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. Jessica had just finished a particularly difficult shift that involved a domestic violence call and a car accident with injuries. She was emotionally and physically drained when she pulled into our driveway at 6:30 a.m., still wearing her police uniform. All she wanted was to get inside, hug me, and decompress from another night of protecting and serving our community. But Margaret had other plans. From her living room window, She had apparently been watching our house, waiting for another opportunity to create a problem. The moment Jessica's car door closed, Margaret was on her phone. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang at 7:15 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see 2 Dallas police officers standing on our porch, looking somewhat uncomfortable. My heart started racing. Had something happened to a family member? Was there an emergency at Jessica's station? I opened the door and the older officer, a sergeant with graying hair, spoke first. "Good morning, sir. We've received a complaint about a disturbance at this address. May we speak with you about what happened here this morning?" I was completely confused. A disturbance? Officers, I think there's been some mistake. My wife just got home from work about 45 minutes ago, and we've been inside the whole time. What kind of disturbance are we talking about? The younger officer checked his notes. We received a call reporting loud arguing, possible domestic violence, and what the caller described as aggressive behavior from someone in a police uniform. The caller was quite insistent that we needed to respond immediately. That's when it clicked. Margaret had called the police on Jessica, probably hoping to create some kind of scandal or get her in trouble with her department. The audacity was breathtaking. She had fabricated an entire story just to harass us. I explained to the officers that my wife was a Dallas police officer who had just gotten home from her shift, and that there had been no arguing or disturbance of any kind. The sergeant's expression shifted slightly, and I could see him putting the pieces together. "Sir, would it be possible to speak with your wife? We need to verify the situation and file our report." "Of course," I said. "She's upstairs changing out of her uniform." "Let me get her." I called up to Jessica, explaining that there were officers at the door who needed to speak with her about a complaint. I could hear her sigh heavily before her footsteps started down the stairs. What happened next was something I'll never forget. Jessica appeared at the top of our staircase, still in her full Dallas Police Department uniform, badge gleaming, utility belt equipped with all her gear. She walked down with the confident posture of someone who had spent 12 years commanding respect in difficult situations. The 2 officers at our door literally froze. The younger officer's eyes widened, and the sergeant straightened up immediately. Jessica approached the door with her professional demeanor fully engaged. "Good morning, officers. I'm Officer Jessica Martinez, badge number 4782, Dallas Police Department, North Division. I understand there's been some kind of complaint about this residence?" The sergeant cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable now. "Officer Martinez, we received a call about a possible domestic disturbance at this address around 7 a.m. The caller reported loud arguing and aggressive behavior from someone in a police uniform." Jessica's expression remained perfectly calm, but I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. "Interesting. Can you tell me who made this complaint?" The younger officer checked his notes again. "A Margaret Hendricks from 1247 Maple Street." She seemed very concerned about the situation. That's when Jessica's professional mask slipped just slightly, replaced by the look of someone who had just figured out exactly what game was being played. "Officers, I arrived home at approximately 6:30 a.m. after completing my shift. I parked in my driveway, retrieved my gear bag, and entered my residence. At no point was there any arguing, disturbance, or aggressive behavior. My husband and I exchanged maybe 10 words, all of them pleasant conversation about my shift." The sergeant nodded slowly. "Ma'am, we have to follow up on all calls, but given the circumstances, it's clear this was either a misunderstanding or—" He let the sentence hang in the air, but everyone knew what he was implying. Jessica stepped forward slightly. "Officers, I'd like to file a report about harassment from this Margaret Hendricks. This is the latest in a series of escalating incidents where she has been targeting my family with frivolous HOA violations and now false police reports. Do you have a few minutes to hear about the pattern of behavior we've been experiencing?" The next hour was fascinating to watch. Jessica, still in her uniform, methodically laid out 3 months of documentation showing Margaret's harassment campaign. She presented it like the experienced officer she was, with dates, times, photographs, and copies of all correspondence. The 2 responding officers took detailed notes, and their attitude toward the situation shifted completely. The sergeant looked at his partner. "We need to pay a visit to Ms. Hendricks and discuss the consequences of filing false police reports." He turned back to Jessica. "Officer Martinez, we'll definitely be following up on this harassment complaint. No one should have to deal with this kind of targeted behavior, especially someone who serves our community." After the officers left, Jessica and I watched from our living room window as they walked across the street to Margaret's house. We could see Margaret answer the door in her bathrobe, probably expecting to hear about how the new neighbors had been arrested, or at least properly intimidated. Instead, we watched her face fall as the officers began what appeared to be a very serious conversation about false reporting and harassment. Margaret kept trying to interrupt, gesturing wildly, but the officers maintained their professional demeanor while clearly laying down the law. 20 minutes later, the officers left Margaret's house and returned to ours. The sergeant handed Jessica a case number and assured her that they would be filing a comprehensive report about both the false complaint and the pattern of harassment we had documented. "Ma'am," he said, "I want you to know that we take harassment of our fellow officers very seriously. If this woman continues to target you or your family, please don't hesitate to call. We'll be keeping this case active and monitoring the situation." But Margaret wasn't done yet. If anything, being confronted by the police had made her more determined to find ways to get back at us. Over the next 2 weeks, we received violation notices for increasingly ridiculous infractions. Our doormat was non-compliant with community aesthetic standards. Our car was parked 3 inches too close to the street. Our porch light was excessively bright and disturbing to neighbors. Each notice came with threats of fines, legal action, and potential foreclosure proceedings. Margaret was clearly hoping to wear us down through bureaucratic warfare. What she didn't realize was that Jessica had dealt with far more serious adversaries than a suburban HOA president with a power complex. The final confrontation came during the monthly HOA board meeting in early April. Jessica had requested time to address the board about the ongoing harassment, and Margaret couldn't refuse without making it obvious that she was trying to suppress legitimate concerns from a resident. The meeting was held in the community center, and about 30 residents showed up, which was apparently a much larger turnout than usual. Word had gotten around the neighborhood about the conflict between the new residents and Margaret, and people were curious to see how it would play out. Jessica arrived in civilian clothes, but carried herself with the unmistakable confidence of a law enforcement officer. She had prepared a presentation that was both professional and devastating in its thoroughness. Using PowerPoint slides, she documented every violation notice we had received, complete with photographs showing that our property was consistently well maintained and in compliance with all legitimate standards. Then she dropped the bombshell. Jessica had done her homework on Margaret herself. It turned out that Margaret's own property had several violations that she had conveniently ignored. Her fence was 6 inches taller than HOA regulations allowed. Her landscaping included plants that weren't on the approved list. Her mailbox was a shade of black that didn't match the community standard she was enforcing on everyone else. But the real revelation came when Jessica presented documentation showing that Margaret had been selectively enforcing rules based on personal grudges. 3 other residents had received harassment campaigns similar to ours, all because they had somehow crossed Margaret in minor ways. One family was targeted because they didn't attend HOA social events. Another was harassed because they questioned a budget expenditure during a board meeting. The room was dead silent as Jessica methodically presented her evidence. You could see the other board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, realizing they had been complicit in Margaret's abuse of power through their silence. Margaret tried to interrupt several times, claiming that Jessica was attacking her character and making false accusations. But Jessica calmly referred back to her documentation, asking specific questions that Margaret couldn't answer without admitting to selective enforcement or outright harassment. The turning point came when Jessica addressed the false police report directly. Mrs. Hendricks called the police to my home, claiming there was a domestic disturbance involving someone in a police uniform. She fabricated an entire story about loud arguing and aggressive behavior, forcing 2 officers to waste their time responding to a completely false complaint. "This isn't just harassment of my family, It's a waste of taxpayer resources and a potential criminal offense. One of the other board members, a man named Robert Chen, finally spoke up. Margaret, is this true? Did you call the police on Jessica's family without witnessing an actual disturbance? Margaret's face turned red as she tried to justify her actions. I heard loud voices and I saw someone in a police uniform acting aggressively. I was concerned for the safety of the neighborhood. Jessica calmly responded. Mrs. Hendricks, the police report shows that you called at 7:05 a.m., claiming to have witnessed loud arguing. However, my shift ended at 6 a.m. and I didn't arrive home until 6:30. The timeline you gave the police doesn't match the actual events, and the officers found no evidence of any disturbance when they investigated. The room erupted in murmurs. As residents realized that Margaret had been caught in a lie, several people began whispering about their own negative experiences with Margaret's leadership. Robert Chen called for order and announced that the board would be conducting an emergency review of Margaret's position as president. Within 2 weeks, Margaret had resigned in disgrace, and the new board had implemented policies to prevent future harassment of residents. But the story doesn't end there. Margaret's resignation triggered an investigation into her management of HOA finances, and it turned out she had been misappropriating funds for personal expenses. The discovery led to criminal charges and a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen money. Meanwhile, Jessica and I finally got to enjoy living in our beautiful neighborhood without constantly looking over our shoulders for the next frivolous violation notice. Our neighbors, many of whom had been suffering under Margaret's tyrannical leadership, began organizing community events and working together to create the kind of neighborhood we had all hoped for when we moved to Willowbrook. States, the irony wasn't lost on anyone that Margaret's attempt to intimidate a police officer with a false police report had ultimately led to her own downfall. Jessica's training and experience had given her the tools to document harassment properly, present evidence effectively, and navigate the system in a way that achieved justice for everyone who had been targeted. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates had transformed into a genuinely welcoming community. The new HOA board focused on maintaining property values through reasonable standards rather than petty harassment. Neighbors actually talked to each other instead of looking for violations to report, and Jessica finally got the peaceful home environment she had been hoping for after her demanding shifts protecting our city. The whole experience taught us both valuable lessons about standing up to bullies, the importance of documentation when dealing with harassment, and how someone's attempt to abuse authority can backfire spectacularly when they target the wrong person. Margaret learned the hard way that calling the police on a police officer requires you to have your story straight. She thought she was dealing with another suburban family that would cave under pressure. Instead, she encountered someone trained to handle much more serious threats than a power-hungry HOA president. Looking back, I almost feel sorry for Margaret. Her need to control and intimidate others ultimately cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her freedom, and her financial security. All because she couldn't resist the urge to harass the new neighbors who had the audacity to park their slightly imperfect car in their own driveway. The best part? Our Honda Civic is still parked in that same driveway every morning when Jessica gets home from her shifts, and now our neighbors wave and smile instead of looking for reasons to complain. Sometimes justice really does prevail, especially when you're prepared to document everything and stand up for what's right. If you're dealing with HOA harassment or neighborhood bullies, remember Jessica's example. Document everything, stay professional, know your rights, and don't be afraid to seek help from the appropriate authorities. And if you happen to be a police officer dealing with similar harassment, well, you probably already know exactly how to handle it. Don't let HOA bullies control your life. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share your own HOA horror stories in the comments below. Have you ever dealt with a power-hungry neighbor or HOA president? What happened when you finally stood up to them? Subscribe to HOA Havoc for more incredible stories of neighborhood drama and justice served. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. And remember, sometimes the best defense against a bully is simply being prepared to document their behavior and stand your ground. See you in the next video.